Is your entire reality only happening in your imagination? Now, people have heard of the concept that your reality is a reflection of who you are because your personality acts in certain ways. Those actions have certain results out in life, so eventually your personality acts and ends up in a reality. So technically at that point you could say your outer life is a reflection of an aspect of your personality because your personality acted in ways to eventually get that outcome. But I have a new take on this whole concept of the outer reality being a reflection of who you are, and it's pretty mind-bending and blowing. So let's take a look. I'm Cody, founder of Yourself Unlimited, where I help share ideas to help you be the happiest person you can be by taking back full control over your thoughts, feelings, and emotions. So come with me on a journey through yourself today that looks at how we perceive anything at all through the mechanism of our imagination, how this can lead to self-growth, and then thirdly, the idea of how you can use this idea to break free from any negative idea that you were just moments ago. Take back full control over your ability to generate your own personality moment by moment. So let's start. The core foundational idea of what I'm trying to portray to you is that there's nothing that you can perceive other than what you generate in your imagination to represent the outside. So picture this, for example. You are sitting there looking at a screen, as well as everything else that's going on around that screen, as well as all the feelings that your body are feeling, as well as the lack of taste or taste if you're eating something, the smells of whatever's going on if your family's cooking. All of these different things are electrical signals plugging into your brain, and your brain has to then sit in this dark head of yours where there's no light in there. The only thing that it has to make an idea or understand what's happening outside of you is those electrical signals that it's receiving. So your brain has to do its best to figure out or make a representation of the reality that's happening outside of your body. So the only reality that you perceive is the representation or the creation of a reality, the generation of a conceptual reality in your imagination of what is happening outside of you. The very moment that you wake up, your brain is taking in information, conglomerating it all into a representation in your imagination of what is happening outside of you. This means that the only thing you actually perceive as a being ever is just the figment in your imagination that exists of what you're idealizing reality to be outside of you. You never actually perceive directly anything outside of you. You take in sensory input and then you create in your imagination automatically all the time this conceptual idea or representation of what is happening outside of you, what it looks like. This is looking more at how a human being or any animal for that matter, or anything at all that can perceive a reality generates its own idea of what's happening outside of that organism in its imagination or in its mind to then have a concrete idea of what's happening outside of them. So in a very real, literal sense, you are looking at the screen, looking at me talking. I'm conveying words through the speakers or headphones that you're listening to. Your brain is taking all of that sensory input, conglomerating it all into this idea of what's happening outside of your body. And you in your own mind are literally perceiving this entire reality that you are generating based upon what sensory input you have coming in. This is super fulfilling in the sense that it releases you from any negative thought patterns at all, because if you are perceiving anything negative, if you're stuck in a negative mood or mentality, just come back to the foundational understanding that nothing that you are perceiving has any meaning. You are literally projecting in your own mind, making this all up. This is all just a figment of your imagination. It is very real, the actual sensory input you have coming in to then have that to base your idea of what's going on outside of you. But any idea of meaning, any idea of this has to be a certain way because of this, all of that is just generated in your imagination. For example, say you get into an argument with a significant other or a friend. You're in the shower later that day, just discussing in your own mind, what was said, what you said to that person, what you should have said to have a really good rebuttal, to then win the situation, to make them feel worse. A lot of people experience this every single day. Now you have this mental representation of who that person is in your head. Think about how crazy this is. You're literally standing there in the shower, having a imaginary conversation with an imaginary version of a person in your mind, and you're arguing with that. Now, what's wild when you extrapolate this idea outwards is that you never actually perceive another person at their core. The only version of somebody that you ever perceive is the version of them that they portrayed to you, that you then use that version of what they portrayed to you in your mind to generate this idea of who that person is. So, a really good example of this is if you heard this person, say we'll call them person A. If person B talks to you a lot about person A, then you eventually meet them. If they said a lot of positive things to you about person A, when you finally meet them, you're going to go in extremely excited to meet this awesome person. Vice versa, if person B talks a lot of negativity about that person, then you meet them, you're going into it with all these negative ideas, all of this negativity already. So it's going to, you have this mental representation of who that person is already in your mind in a concrete form. So when you go to meet that person, you're never ever going to actually be able to directly perceive who that person is. You're only ever going to directly perceive the filter that you see that version of that person through. So imagine putting on whether it's positive or negative, those blinders, you'll only ever perceive them through that. So you'll always have a off-kilter version in your mind of who they are. This can be either positive or negative, it depends. But just knowing that this is a fact can help you understand the mechanisms within you that go into making up your everyday reality experience. So you're never going to actually experience somebody else directly. You have a mental representation of who that person is, and that's what you directly experience within yourself. When you go to meet somebody that you already know, you have a concrete idea of who that personality is. You're only ever interacting with the version of that person that you have in your mind, which is a pretty wild concept unto itself. So if your version of who that person is not exactly who that person is, you're going to be, misinteracting with that person. In the same way that you will ever only have a representation of who I am through the version of me that you get through these videos. Say that you eventually meet me in person. You will only have an imaginary representation of who I am based on the version of myself that I portray to you during that interaction. So say I'm having a really bad day or an off day, you will have an imaginary idea of who I am based upon that off version of myself, but you will never be able to truly experience me at my core and who I am. So think about how wild this is. You're living a life, you're going throughout life, only ever interacting with the versions of the other people that you have in your imagination to represent that person. Pretty mind-blowing. So being able to really think about what version of that person you have in your head can allow you the freedom to then play around with the idea. So for instance, we have all had good experiences and bad experiences with certain people. So say you have a friend who you just argued with. Now the next time you go to see them, if you remember and have it in your mind that the last time you interacted with that person, he was a negative person, it was just nothing but bashing each other. If you go into the next interaction, immediately having that version of them in your mind, you're going to go into it already with some friction, with some hostility. So what I do is I try and imagine the happiest, most fun version of that person that I have in my mind that I've ever interacted with them with every time I go to meet them, so that you're already expecting to interact with the best version of them, with the coolest, most upbeat version of that person. This usually sets up a good situation for an awesome experience with them. So that's one way to use this idea of how we all have this mental representation of things around us and a unique version of every single person we've ever met within your imagination. And that's the only thing you ever interact with, is that representation of that person within your mind. It's a good way to use the experience in a positive way. So part 2, how can this be used in a self-growth concept, in a way of growing yourself individually? So understanding that the only thing you ever interact with in life isn't the thing outside of you, isn't the actual tree. It's your mental representation of that object, of that person, of that situation, of that tree, for example. So say that you interact with something and it brings negativity and it makes you into a negative mood. That means that you can look within yourself, try and understand, because now you know you are only ever interacting with not the thing itself, but your mental representation in your imagination of that thing outside of you. You can now look at what that representation is, how it exists within you. You can turn a flashlight inwards and look at the inner structure of your being, of your personality, of yourself, and understand your relationship to these things. So say that there is some idea outside of you, say something that you really aspire to be, but are afraid to work towards. Or say that you know somebody, this is a clear example, you know somebody that's doing exactly what you want to do in life, but is way better at it than you. We usually have some type of hostility towards that person because we are low-key jealous of their success, because it brings us into looking at our possible own failures, at our own inadequacies. How does this lead to self-growth? So because now you understand and know that the only reality you will ever perceive and ever do perceive is all just created in your imagination based on sensory input from outside of you. That means that you can create it to be exactly what you want it to be. If you were feeling or experiencing something negative a few minutes ago, now understanding that the entire reality you're experiencing is all generated in your own imagination, you can imagine it to be something more positive. You can imagine it to be anything you want. So the way I use this all the time is, if I was experiencing something negative, say I'm getting yelled at by a random person at work, I understand that that is all, everything I'm experiencing at that point is all just different ideas that I'm bringing into my imagination and creating this whole reality based on it. So if you're having a negative reaction, you realize in that moment that you can take back full control over what experience you're having of what's happening around you, and you can experience it in whatever way you want. If you want to have fun with it, if you want to go back into feeling your natural happiness, you can sort of relieve all of the tension, all of the negativity that you were just experiencing a moment ago, because now you're taking back into account that you're the one generating your own reality. So it goes very simple. If you're perceiving something or a moment that you're not enjoying, realize that you are creating that very experience of non-enjoyment. And now, because you're taking back full responsibility of creating your life in that moment, you can then feel whatever you want to feel. You can laugh at the fact that you were just feeling negativity. Another cool way to use this in a self-growth methodology is to understand that you only perceive the version of other people that you create in your mind to represent them. So if you ever perceive the person that you aspire to be, if you ever perceive a really good emotion that you say, oh, I wish I was that way, if you have the ability to even perceive somebody being a certain way, that means that you created that version of that person in your mind, in your imagination, for you to perceive in your own cognizance, in your own reality. So for you to be able to even perceive greatness within somebody else, this means that you already have that within you as a concept, as a part of your personality. All that you have to do is choose to be that version of yourself every single moment, to exhibit those characteristics that that other quote unquote better person is representative of. Just act in those same ways and you'll be that literal version of yourself. All right, let's recap. So you can take back full control over your experience of life at any moment. And this is the most freeing aspect of anything you could ever learn, is that life can literally, you can control the full experience that you have over life at any moment. Now, there are tons of other things on this concept that come up that I'll discuss in other videos. But for now, we'll start with as I just described it. And there's plenty more to it that we will cover. But I want you guys to comment what your understanding is of this. Comment what your interpretation is. If you think I have everything absolutely incorrect, please comment and put me in my place, because that helps me understand other ideas of how other people are generating their own reality. And then that helps me help everybody else. That helps me get put in place to now I will see my own ideas from a new perspective to help other people see their own ideas from new perspectives. And we all learn and grow in new ways. So go ahead, dislike, like, comment, do whatever you want to do. Just give me some type of input if you have input. If not, go on your way and enjoy your life. Enjoy creating the experience that you are fulfilling every single moment. But that's the idea. That's the new interpretation that I haven't really heard anybody else describe in this exact same way. So think about this when you wake up in the morning and see if it impacts me. See if you're able to really feel how you are generating your own reality every single moment in your imagination. It's fun stuff. It's definitely some interesting stuff. Take care and enjoy, guys.